Okay, I'm here with James from Ahead of the Curve, and Seth. So, James, if you want to introduce yourself, go for it.
All right, I'll take the floor first. I'm James Bergman, also known as Ahead of the Curve on YouTube and Instagram. I film book reviews, philosophical or fictional, thought-provoking in any sense. I try to talk about them in that regard. I have discussions like these a lot of the time to do with philosophy or atheism, or some political topics at times. I also have a podcast, The Bastard Sons of Oedipus, if you're feeling a bit transgressive, if you're feeling a bit edgy, if you feel a bit...
That's a badass name. To interject, sorry. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're a fan. Just to clean things up for when we get into the meat of things, I would say that I am an agnostic atheist, meaning that I'm not yet convinced that God exists, therefore I lack a belief or I disbelieve in God. And so that's my current position. So feel free to swerve me any way you wish, guys, if you can. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, man. So I'm Eric Evans from Conscious Philosophy. So really on my channel, I make philosophy videos, of course, and I have professors on and other, YouTube channels, and we talk about, philosophy of religion, some theology. I just had Dustin Crummett on, and we talked about gun control as well. So really all, different areas. It's not really constrained in one area. I have a philosophy degree and psychology degree from Rutgers. And I just do conversations like this as well with these guys. So pass it off to you, Seth.
Hey, my name's Seth. I'm a senior at UNC Charlotte, major's history, minor's philosophy. I'm also into transcendental arguments. Transcendental argument has been used by people like Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, but I usually focus on the transcendental argument for God. I'm into presuppositional apologetics, and I'm also into philosophy of religion and other aspects of philosophy.
Cool, man. So today we're predominantly going to discuss new atheism. It might bleed into some other areas, but that's the main conversation here. So I guess we just kick it off. James, what do you think of new atheism? Like, what are your first thoughts? Do you have criticisms of it? Do you affirm it?
Well, I must say that the focus in the new atheism movement, if you can call it new atheism, by the way, which I know that is a disputed point, which I must agree with in all fairness. I think there's nothing particularly new about new atheism. I mean, I think the whole sort of definition of it was based upon the fact that they happened to write books at the same time in the same decade. Dennett's book and Harris's End of Faith and God Is Not Grey and The God Delusion. That's pretty much why, and there's nothing new about it. It's just timing, I guess. I mean, fun fact as well, Ayaan Hirsi Ali was supposed to be the fifth horseman in the discussion, but she can actually make the meeting. So actually I'm reading her book Infidel right now. Would recommend it. It would have been a different chemistry, I suppose. But anyway, a tangent there. New atheism, I heavily reliant on rhetoric, predominantly used by Christopher Hitchens, which I will profess my love for that man all day long. However, when it comes to his philosophical arguments against theism, that is where he falls short, and that's where all of them fall short, effectively. As I said, they all rely heavily on rhetoric, and it's not as if their arguments are bad. It's more their approach to philosophy and theology is poor. It's outright poor. But I mean, they have every single right to criticize where religion has got it wrong and where in the scripture it is dubious. And I'll say all day long, fair enough to that.
Yeah. See, I like what you say there, James, too, about where religion has got it wrong. Because, of course, you have people in Jesus's name doing horrific things. Now, obviously, that's contrary to what he taught. But even Hitchens, what was the God is not great, how religion poisons everything.
Yeah.
Is that, does religion poison everything? I mean, that's a really bold assertion, that must be, and I think that's clearly false.
Well, it shows the heavy reliance on rhetoric.
Yeah, right. You're right.
That's exactly.
It's kind of like clickbait.
Yeah.
I get a little sense of clickbait there, but no, I agree. The rhetorical strategy is pretty powerful. I mean, myself, I really didn't read a lot of Hitchens and Dennett. I was really focused on Dawkins and Harris, and I know you read it, James, but my most recent article, well, not my most recent, but A Thoughtless Confidence, New Atheism.
Yeah.
And I talk about how they're just really lacking in many areas as compared to a tradition of really robust atheists like Sobel, J.L. Mackie, Thomas Nagel, Graham Oppie, and even Nietzsche, right? So you can bring Nietzsche into the picture. I don't really know if he's an atheist, but certainly critical of Christianity and the contingency of our moral values and whatnot. But Seth, if you want to add anything onto that.
Yeah, the new atheists also, James made some good points, but also I feel like the new atheists also heavily promoted scientism. Now, Christianity has always accepted science. However, it's when scientism comes into conflict with Christianity. I don't believe theology I want to say theology. Rather, I don't believe that religion and science are in conflict with each other. Rather, worldviews are at conflict with each other.
I totally agree with you. I think that was, the main conflict is between the teleological view and the mechanical view of reality. It's really not a conflict between science and religion. I mean, there are plenty of scientists who are religious and who are believers in God. So, yeah, I think that's just a crude, caricature or misrepresentation of the real debate here between this mechanical and teleological view. I did want to say just real quick, just backing up, I missed a point, but Sam Harris and Dawkins are utterly convincing. I mean, they're really witty, and I was just fully convinced by them. I mean, to a point where I just felt religion and belief in God was not only irrational, but absurd. Right, like just flat out silly. When you hear Dawkins talk about the flying spaghetti monster, or Sam Harris saying it's just an imaginary friend, or you guys are delusional. I don't see how it's remotely delusional to try to construct a metaphysical demonstration of all of reality. Right? Why is there something rather than nothing? So I just think these are ridiculous points. But going back to that, it does have a lot of rhetorical success. I mean, it's interesting. It's like, wow, I never heard this before. It's like you're kind of breaking out of that traditional, when you grow up, you kind of accept God, you kind of feel maybe rebellious latching on to the new atheist. But again, I'm not putting down atheists like you, James, Agnostic Atheist, because I know that you care about these things seriously and you engage with, the greatest minds that have ever commented on this matter. But I'm strictly talking about new atheism. Sure. If that even is a thing, like you alluded to.
As if it is really a thing.
If it is really a thing.
It's more of just a parade, really, of angry sort of people accusing sort of religion of solely and purely of just being this this existential cope mechanism, which Freud was right. I do think Freud was right, but he wasn't right in saying that is what is religion. Because there is no doubt whatsoever that to see your dog in heaven, or your grandparents in heaven, or to see Elvis.
I would love to see Elvis.
For me to see Christopher Hitchens in heaven. These are these are appealing ideas, and Freud was completely right when he said that yes, it is consoling.
Yeah.
But when, and again, it's not only Freud, because it's the new atheists as well who's kind of claimed that, well, religion helps with death anxiety, blah, blah, blah. Like Ernest Becker, Otto Rank, they all say this. But it's as if they're using that as a main argument against it. Which, okay, like, fair enough, you can say that. But don't use it as a main argument. That's the problem.
James, yeah, you're totally correct in that. And I think what they do, and this is really pervasive among internet atheists and whatnot, they commit a genetic fallacy. Right. So they say, Oh, I know the origin of your belief. It's just that you're scared of death and you hope to see your family in heaven and whatnot. Well, that's fallacious. Okay, is it true that religion makes people feel better about not just being reduced to worm food? Sure. But it doesn't follow for a moment that religion is therefore false in any way. So or not belief in God, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I do agree with Freud as well. I think that he is right that we do yearn for this cosmic father to rid our death anxiety.
Sky Daddy.
Sky Daddy, yeah. Right. but in no way does that entail that this is false. It's just it's a bad argument if you want to.
You brought up a good point, Eric. And yes, people do have this sense of divinity. However, it would make sense if God does exist. It would make sense for him to create us in a way that we have knowledge of the divine, just as John Calvin, the theologian, calls it a sensus divinitatis, or a sense of divinity. If God does exist, it makes sense that he will create beings that will have the ability to come to know him.
Yeah,
so you can go. Man.
Oh no, go ahead, man. Finish. I don't want to talk the whole time.
But yeah, you guys brought up good points too with the rhetoric. However, when it comes to rhetoric, Saint Augustine has a good quote in his Confessions, and he said, "Fine style doesn't make something true." So you can have the best rhetoric in the world. The sophists in ancient Greece had good rhetoric. Does that mean what they said was right?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. If you want to touch on that at all, James, or I don't really have anything.
Yeah,
to say.
no,
I agree with you, Seth. I mean,
no, I completely agree with the rhetoric. The thing is, though, is that rhetoric is often used as a crutch to compensate for a bad argument.
Right, totally.
That is precisely what it is mostly used for. Although I don't know if I consciously say that about the New Atheists. I mean, the thing is, I believe that they believe that their arguments are good. Let me just put it that way. Because that doesn't mean that they are sort of disingenuous. I mean, it might be disingenuous in some regard to not actually consciously look into the arguments that deeply, or at least as far as they're concerned, they've looked into the arguments deeply enough. But it's that sort of that unrealization that maybe, just maybe, theism might have a few good points. I mean, Christopher Hitchens himself said that the fine-tuning argument to him was actually probably the best argument for theism.
Did he really?
Yeah, he said it a few times, but there's one particular clip where I think it was called Collision, his documentary with I can't remember his name now, but there's a sort of clip when he's in the back of a car and he says, the most convincing argument is, the Goldilocks zone sort of thing, the fine-tuning, how we came to be, how we do exist. And personally, I think that is, intuitively, it's just so attractive.
Yeah.
It really is. But I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So I think that was a good way to wrap it up for this part. Maybe we can go into like black theism, right? Because that's something that the three of us have been wanting to discuss. So James, you recently made a video on this. I don't always want to hand the torch off to you for the first time. I hope I'm not putting on too much pressure. But I'm curious because as an agnostic atheist, how do you approach that? Oh no, I just lack belief in God, man. Right. So I hear that all the time. What do you think about that?
It's a landfill of different sorts of atheists, because some atheists are ready to concede that maybe there is an issue in the definition. I mean, Cosmic Skeptic himself even came out recently and saying that it is sort of a cop out in some regard. And I saw that and I was like, because I've been thinking about the same thing recently, and I was like, actually, I can't help but agree. And the thing is, with the sort of video that I released, it was only a sort of a short video for anyone who hasn't watched it already. But it's amazing how many people felt personally attacked by this sort of a supposition that maybe they need to question how they define their atheism, because I'm not here to tell anybody how they should think or what words to use necessarily. I'm more here to, and even in the video I was saying, I was demonstrating, basically saying how we need to think more about it, because its assumptions are not consistent, right?
They're not. Yeah.
And I got loads of comments so far. And to be fair, the majority of them are fairly well thought out, but some of them, talking about, for example, Santa. I mean, in the past I've used a Santa sort of a tooth fairy thing, and look,
I still
do
believe in Santa, by the way. Yeah.
Well, I hope we all do. Surely.
Don't spoil anything.
I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, this is all PC. There are kids watching. Maybe we have to pretend that there might be children watching.
That's true. That's true.
You can't spill the beans.
Yeah, you're right about that. We'll cut
so
this.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, I don't completely disregard the Tooth Fairy Santa thing in terms of equivocating that with a deity or a personal god, because that's what's being done. It's saying, well, God is as immaterial as the Tooth Fairy. And look, intuitively, sure, okay, there is a point there.
Yeah.
But the thing that is missed, and you guys can tune into this, is that the thing that is missed is that there is a huge amount of historical, sociocultural background. There's so much background behind this idea of God. Like centuries of philosophers have been talking about this. And with Santa, I mean, it's just a it's a child myth. I mean, when you compare them, it's just incomparable because of the cultural, the historical, the philosophical background of one over the other.
Yeah, I mean, when atheists tell me like, oh, I don't believe in Santa or the Tooth Fairy, I mean, neither do I. Okay, even though I just said I did, I don't. No, but I mean, we're talking ultimately about the inexhaustible source of all there is, right? We're talking about a metaphysical demonstration for why anything exists at all. It has nothing to do with Santa or the Tooth Fairy. We're trying to get to the best explanation for all of reality. And if Santa and the Tooth Fairy exist, they would be among a plurality of all things that exist. They would be utterly contingent upon that first, inexhaustible source of being. So, I mean, it's just an absurd statement to make. I really don't have much else to say about that.
I agree, Eric. And if Christianity is true, then God has revealed himself. Now, I know people may say you can come to know God, or like you can prove God through natural theology, whether like a cosmological argument or a theological argument. However, if Christianity is true, then he has revealed himself. It's not as if we're just making this up. Rather, it's the Bible is divine revelation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I think we should always start out with natural theology. I think that's the first starting point. And like proofs, when we talk about proofs, it's in classical theism, that just means demonstration. It's not like people say, prove it to me. Like there's this beer in front of me, like I can show you that God exists. That's not how it works. I mean, we're arguing abductively to the best explanation. Yeah, is the best explanation atheism or theism? That's really, at the end of the day, what we're arguing. So proof just means demonstration, classically defined.
Is it okay if I touch on that real quick, Eric, on the nature of evidence?
Oh yeah, go for it, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So the one thing about the new atheists is, going back to the new atheists, is that they need to understand that not everything is proven in the same way. For example, the way we prove the law of non-contradiction will be different from the temperature that water boils. So, for example, if we want to find out the temperature at what water boils, we set up an experiment. We observe like at what the water boiling, and then that's how we come to the conclusion.
Yeah.
However, when we talk about philosophy, for example, the law of non-contradiction, then philosophy has to take place in order for us to prove the law of contradiction. And the reason why we have to use philosophy to prove it is because science or empiricism can't prove the law of non-contradiction. Rather, the law of non-contradiction is presupposed in everything that we do. So I think a great example of proving, for example, like a law of non-contradiction is what Aristotle did in his book, The Metaphysics. So in the book of Metaphysics, the sophists approach Aristotle and they ask him, what if I don't accept the law of non-contradiction? So it's going to be very difficult for Aristotle to prove the law of non-contradiction with science or empiricism. Rather, he uses a transcendental argument. So Aristotle says, if you engage in argumentation, you assume the laws of logic, and that includes the law of non-contradiction. Now, that proof is totally different from a scientific proof.
It is. I totally agree with you. And there are really two different proofs out there. There's scientific proofs, and there's I think Lennox talked about this, like personal proofs. Like God is not really a scientific question. God is a personal agent creator. He uses some example. I don't know if I'm going to nail this down correctly, but like think of Ford, right? The cars or the trucks, Ford. Two rational explanations would be a scientific one. Maybe you can describe the internal combustion of like the engine in a Ford. But another rational explanation would be Henry Ford, right? So those are two rational explanations. So not everything is not everything comes down to science. Science cannot explain everything. I don't know if that adequately addressed what you just said, but that's where it kind of led me. If you have anything to say on that, James.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but agree with you once again, guys, in the sense that and this is really the crux of how absurd this sort of new atheism assumption is. And now, look, it's not that I completely disagree with the sort of argument or the perception that I'm about to say, because I think there are nuances to this. But I just lost my train of thought about what that was.
I hate when that happens. It happens to me all the time, man.
No, it normally happens when I make it's when I make a preface to what I say, and then I go back to it, and there's just nothing there.
Okay. No problem, man.
Yeah, it'll come to me.
Yeah. Just real quick.
It was actually about evidence, and yeah, the standard of evidence. Because the new atheists assume that the evidence for God is material. And this is the thing. It's like, why would you assume that a transcendent being can be demonstrated with material evidence? It's I think that's a really interesting idea, in the sense that, like, it's incompatible. And if you assume that, it's really barking up the wrong tree. I mean, philosophically speaking, even reasonably, just pure reason. I mean, it's comparing two different sort of modes of investigation together and saying that, yeah, like you can grow an orange on a banana tree. It's like, well, obviously not,
Right. Yeah, I think that's a pretty decent point. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that at all, Seth.
Yeah, in a way, it's like the new atheists became so focused on science, they try to use science to explain everything. A great example of that was Sam Harris in his book, The Moral Landscape, how he tried to use science and reason to prove ethics, or like of an objective morality. However, the problem with that is that science is descriptive.
Yeah.
It tells us how the world is, not how it ought.
How it ought to be, right.
Be.
Yeah.
So, and also that with reasoning, like, people have used their reasoning in the past to do evil things. A great example of that is Nazi scientists during World War II. They were extremely smart when it came to science. However, they used their talents for evil.
Right.
And people can also use their reason for an ethic based on power. Like a great example would be like Machiavelli or Nietzsche, who bases their ethic on power.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, I mean, I think this notion of scientism as well has been really the lifeline of new atheism. I mean, you hear people all the time, like I said, atheists saying, I'm a science guy. I don't believe any of that other stuff. I'm a science guy. Well, so am I. So are we all. We all are. But further, I think a more pernicious issue with scientism really is it does strip you of subjective, like this subjective investigation. Like I did a video on Kierkegaard recently, and you can think of like coming to belief in God as maybe you could throw away all the arguments in natural theology, right? Like I could show you that the ontological argument's good or contingency, right? But just orienting your will towards the mystery of being, becoming immersed in that. And science, if you're going to predicate if you're going to try to get, obtain or extract true meaning from science, I think at the end of the day, it's dangerous, and it's not really, I don't see that happening, right? Science, like you said, Seth, is descriptive. It's just describing things. There's this whole subjective realm of value that's left out if you hinge your entire paradigm on science, specifically scientism.
It kind of reminds me actually of the I don't know if you guys have seen the film Law Abiding Citizen.
Sounds familiar,
but it's a brilliant film. But there's a quote which just I was reminded of when you brought this up, which is, in court, it's not about what you know, it's about what you can prove. And I was just thinking in context to that, science deals with things only in which science can prove, in the subject strictly of science, which is that which is consistently material. But the thing is, and this is the thing with psychology as well, psychology can be very well criticized in the sense of a lot of things that were demonstrated to be true, which were in psychology, as we know, is more subjective than the hard sciences. They are now not true because cultures have changed. And so science, and this goes back to the central point of this, which is science expects to have, these descriptions of all things, when really science should only deal with science. I mean, because again, it's expecting to get an answer or a material answer from an immaterial based thing.
Absolutely.
It's really the wrong way to go,
Yeah, Lennox has this example in his book. I actually have it here. Can science explain everything?
Yeah.
And I'm just paraphrasing from him, but he has, like, say Mary baked a pie or something. Well, science can explain everything that went into that, maybe the ingredients she used, the temperature, all that kind of stuff, but it can never explain why Mary baked the pie. Right. So when we think about questions with God's existence, they're not scientific, right? They're philosophical. They're metaphysical. And I've sent you that quote from David Bentley Hart a lot, James. It's in my article. You know what I'm talking about? How Dawkins says, I think a natural selection is the answer to existence or something like that.
Yeah,
but David basically says you could explain everything down to the the final point in science. You could explain the whole natural world, cosmology. You could explain everything in the universe, the physical arrangements of the universe, but you will never arrive at the question, why does it exist at all? Right? Science cannot answer that question. It's a totally different question.
It's a philosophical question. That's the thing. Yeah.
And it's predicated on reason too, right?
Yeah.
So it's not all scientific answers. It's reason. We use reason, and like you were alluding to, Seth, we presuppose all kinds of things. Are our cognitive faculties functioning properly? Are they actually aimed at truth? Is there really an external world outside of my mind? Is there uniformity in nature? So all of these things are kind of presupposed. So
a lot of the time, I mean, even in a reply to a comment in the Atheism short that I did, I like echoing again what Peterson said in the Sam Harris debate, or one of them that they did, which I would recommend to everybody and anyone because they're just brilliant. There's about 5 of them with Harris and Peterson. They're just really good. If not, well, convoluted, sure, but interesting nonetheless. And and yeah, his sort of quote is that 99% of our processing is unconscious. And so, that is really demonstrating clearly that we don't act with this sort of, you know, hard science reason all the time. I mean, hardly any of the time. I mean, it's ridiculous to us. Yeah, I mean, we rely on, it's a difficult word to use, but we do rely in some regard on faith for, again, like 99% of things that we do, because it's all autonomous.
Absolutely. Yeah. What about English and history and all other subjects? I mean, should we just throw them out the window? It's just clear that not everything comes down to science. You know, that's just a
there is also a double standard, I find, and I'm not saying that I believe in the resurrection. I'm not making any sort of claim about this, but I will say, however, that what I found is that there is a double standard in people not finding the historical evidence for Jesus, or, I mean, the resurrection is a bit more difficult because it's obviously an extraordinary claim, more so than Jesus actually existing. But what I do find, though, is that they're so easy to claim that, oh yeah, Jesus never existed, when we have more evidence, historical evidence, to demonstrate that he did exist, and we do for most people that we assume that they did. Like in history, it's complete double standards. And I'm not saying that I'm still investigating Jesus's life, and I'm not sure completely whether I'd agree with or disagree with that. But I will say that there is some kind of double standard going on a lot of the time.
I agree. Yeah. Seth, if you had anything to add on to that, if not, I did want to backpedal into lacktheism, because I think we verged away from that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I did have some more things to say about that. Did you want to add anything, man, on top of that, or do you want to go
I feel like ultimately, like, it keeps going back to clash of worldviews. I feel like both of you guys made good points. Both atheists and theists love science. It's right. Yeah. It's not, religion and science aren't in conflict. Rather, naturalism and theism is at conflict. That's what's going on here. It's like science has always been promoted by Christianity, whether it was the Byzantine Empire or the West with the Roman Catholic Church. So I feel like it's just a clash of worldviews that just keeps being brought up.
Yeah, I would agree. And the mechanical and the teleological worldview, is there this built-in end goal in nature? Is something built into this, or is it just, the opposite of that? It's just this mechanical worldview. But real quick, I did want to go back to lacktheism, because this is something that we've talked about for a while. And my main issue with this is, it's really, if you define atheism as I lack belief in God, you're really just reducing that down to a psychological state. In other words, the proposition, it's the proposition of atheism is it can't be true or false there, right? If you just say, oh, I just lack belief. Because if you think about, like, babies lack belief, cats lack belief, rocks, zebras. So that can't be the definition of atheism. I just lack belief. It has to be, you have to either affirm it, or you completely reject that proposition. Does God exist? You say no, right? So those are just some of my thoughts. I just think it's reduced to a psychological state, like, oh, I lack belief. Well, no, you either affirm or reject that proposition. Does God exist?
Oh yeah, it's okay if I add something real quick, Eric.
Yeah. Oh, go for it, man. Yeah.
So ultimately, if it's a metaphysical proposition in which God does not exist, or whether it's a lack of belief in, like, I don't believe in God, I don't know, so I don't believe, I feel like everyone still has a worldview. So in a way, everyone has a view of three things: reality, knowledge, and ethics. It doesn't matter who you are, everyone has that worldview. So in a way, I don't feel like anyone can hide the burden of proof of trying to explain reality, knowledge, and ethics.
I do agree with this, because this comes up a lot with I think new atheists in particular, that the burden of proof is, it's not on, if I'm an atheist, right? It's not on me. It's on you, man. Well, no, I mean, it's on everyone. I mean, if you're affirming atheism, if you say, oh, I am an atheist, well, don't you want to show why you're an atheist, or provide reasons? Or if you offer the problem of evil, well, then you're saying God probably doesn't exist because of evil. Well, the burden of proof is on you to show that. It's not only on the atheist it's not only on the theist where the atheist just sits back and says, he just plays the skeptic. The burden of proof is on the atheist as well to show why God probably doesn't exist, or God is not evil and God are not compatible in some way. That's the way I see it.
And like I want to see both your views on this. So sorry for interrupting, guys, but I want to see both you guys' view on this. Like ultimately, like everyone has to have a view of reality, knowledge, and ethics. Even if you were agnostic when it comes to metaphysics, that's still a view of reality. If someone takes a Kantian view of metaphysics, that we can't know the noumena, that's still a view of reality. So in a way, like I want to see your guys' view, like in a way we all have a worldview, and in a way everyone like tries to explain the world that we live in.
James, I don't know if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, I have a couple points. Yeah, so I want to point out that it's very often that I find that the atheists kind of misinterpret what atheism actually is, in the sense of it not being a worldview. It's simply just not believing in God. For example, an atheist can believe in objective morality. It doesn't mean that claim is true. It just means that they can if they want to. So we have to remember that atheism is only the disbelief in God. It is not a moral prescription of any kind. An atheist can also be many other things. I mean, their views on ethics can be objective. Like they can be a vegan. They can agree with Peter Singer about ethics and so on. Like we do have to remember that, because I feel that it often gets conflated that atheism is a worldview. It isn't. It's just a disbelief in God. I also wanted to say with the tooth fairy thing, and I'm on board with you guys in insofar as I would expect the atheist to at least give reasons why they don't believe in God, because like you said, Eric, it's just a cop out really, just to say, I lack a belief, therefore
it is
end of story, no further conversation. It's like, well, even if we were talking about the tooth fairy, I'd still have the intellectual honesty to explain why I don't believe in the tooth fairy, even though we would all assume that it might be arbitrary to even do that. I would do it anyway, because that's just what you would do if you're taking the topic seriously. You would philosophically demonstrate why it is not reasonable to believe in Santa or the tooth fairy, and it is the same in the same regard that you would do so with God or that exactly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, I do agree with that. The first point, I do want to hammer on this notion that atheism is not a worldview. I do agree with you in a sense that atheism is just, you reject the proposition that God exists, but my concern is what flows from that rejection of that proposition. Mm-hmm. In other words, does it kind of inevitably turn into a worldview? I mean, if you do believe the universe is devoid of any kind of personal creator that has an interest in his creation, and there are moral, objective values and duties that you must do these things, not just, I just feel like, no, you have to do these things. I feel like in that sense, atheism sort of inevitably kind of entails some kind of worldview. I don't know what you think about that, James. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, like Seth said, everybody has a worldview, but my point was simply that atheism itself doesn't assume any particular worldview, because as I said, you can believe in objective morality if you want to. It doesn't mean that your argument is good, but it means that you can if you want to.
Yeah, you're right about that.
And yeah, I mean, like you're sort of implying, yes, atheism does leave the opportunity for, some sort of subjective view of reality, sure, but it isn't any indicator of what that subjective perception might be. And I'm even saying subjective because I'm jumping the gun a bit, because again, an atheist like Sam Harris can believe in objective morality. So like I'm saying here, we do have to be very careful, because it can get a bit difficult.
Yeah. Well, sorry for interrupting, guys. I also just want to say that sometimes theists misrepresent atheists by believing that all atheists are naturalists. And I just want to say that naturalism entails atheism. However, atheism doesn't entail naturalism.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point, Seth. Yeah, James, I do see what you're saying with that. And we have to also be really careful not to pin down causation. Like, oh, Hitler, Stalin, they were, even though Hitler said he was a Christian,
Yeah.
I mean, you can say a lot of things to promote your
belt buckles.
Yeah. Well, we want to be really careful not to say, oh, atheism is the cause. We don't want to ascribe causation to atheism, because there's atheists out there who are wonderful people, better people than believers in God and Christianity. I mean, so that's a bad argument. But I will say this, where this could kind of maybe segue into Nietzsche a little bit. I personally do think that atheism entails this kind of nihilism. And that is a bold claim. But I at the end of the day, I do see atheism leading to that right down the road. So maybe we could get into kind of God is dead, right? Because I think this is all really tied up with this atheistic.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I mean, I've realized this as of late, which is we have to remember to distinguish between the theoretical implications of something and the practical demonstration of that thing. And so when we talk about, the death of God and whether society or not is gone worse or better, how things are at the moment in society, we really have to, be careful once again of whether really things are actually that bad under no God, because again, theoretically, yes, maybe you could say that atheism entails nihilism. Maybe you could even say that, maybe. But you have to look at how things are and how things have been under atheism. And you really have to say, well, how's the theory equated to how things have actually been or are? And I think that is a really interesting question, because obviously it's a subjective perception of whether how good things are. But as far as I'm concerned, they haven't, they're not evidently as bad as Nietzsche implied that they would be. So that's my view.
Yeah, that's Seth, do you have anything to add on to that, man? Or
yeah, ultimately, like, if a society doesn't believe in God, or rather, if the majority of the society doesn't believe in God, then I don't believe that it will lead to chaos. However, I feel like we should focus on if God exists or he does not exist. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I don't want to focus on utility or the practical use of religion. Rather, nowadays I just focus on if it's true or not. So if you have a society like the Czech Republic or England, where James lives, and the majority of people are unbelievers, and they're great people and they're living good lives. Yeah, that's good. I mean, cool. But at the same time, though, God could still exist, So I feel like
that's true.
Oh yeah, of course. I'd never assume that. That would follow, of course.
I kind of take a little bit more cynical view of this. I Nietzsche in Ecce Homo, he says somewhere that when the death of God reaches the ears of men, it hasn't reached the ears of men yet, right? It's going to take a long time. That there will be wars that the world has never seen before. So for me, I do think that chaos will ensue when our whole horizon is stripped from belief in God. I fear a cult of individualism will arise from this. And the key point here is we're forgetting the story, right? The story that the Western world is predicated upon, that God comes down as man and sacrifices himself to all of the world, right? And love the neighbor as yourself. I think we're forgetting that story. We're going to see kind of this individualistic paradigm. But like I said, when this will happen, I don't know. I think it's going to take a long time. But as Tim Keller notes, our secular world, I mean, the great majority of history was predicated on religious belief in an afterlife and whatnot. And our secular world now is just, what is going to happen is just nothingness. It's just oblivion, right? So I don't see human beings even rising to the level of Übermensches. I think that there's going to be, when nihilism first hits upon humanity, I think there will be a need for God again. I think there will be a resurgence in belief. Now, again, these are really bold claims. I don't know these things for sure, but this is where I see the trajectory of human history going potentially.
And also, I just want to say something real quick. I don't feel like people can live out atheism. Now, by atheism, I mean like God does not exist. So if someone has presuppositions such as biological determinism, moral nihilism, and everything like that, then people are going to live that out. And ultimately, I just can't see people living that out. Like I just can't. You know, people may say, they may hold to these beliefs saying like, hey, I'm a biological determinist, I'm more a nihilist, you know, and everything like that. But I don't feel like they can live it out. You know, I feel like most of the time they steal from the Christian worldview.
Yeah, I mean, as Dostoevsky says, if there is no God, all is permitted. And, you know, that could fall into moral nihilism, that, hey, there's no such thing as moral truth. And even existential nihilism, which is the most pernicious form of nihilism, that, okay, nothing matters at all. Nothing matters at all.
May I sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah,
May I interject? I just can't help. I mean, many things have been said, and I'm so Slavoj Žižek in his book Violence made a good point, which was Dostoevsky did say that well, it's actually debated that the line is even in the Brothers Karamazov. I read it recently and I couldn't actually find it. I think it's a paraphrase, but the conversation is throughout the book, really. But it's, the theme is made. But Žižek said something really interesting, which is, you know, whilst under this secular worldview that everything's permitted, without God, Žižek pointed out that everything is permitted with God as well if you believe he's on your side. I mean, we see this all the time with people going too far with these practical religious beliefs. Whether you can call them religious beliefs according to their own doctrine is debatable, but they are still in the name of, and they are still with the assumption of God being on their side. Like Hitler, you mentioned earlier, he actually believed that he had a revelation from God. And he got the Gott mit uns, God is on our side, God with us, on the belt buckles of the German soldiers, and the church backed this. And so it's really just this case of, yes, his interpretation of the Bible may not be consistent with what it actually, or whatever that even means, whatever it actually is saying, but we have to remember that the hands of Christianity or theism in general are not clean, because it unfortunately it does carry with it these things, these unfortunate interpretations. And may I also add that these interpretations could have been prevented. For example, I mean, this is a tangent here, but it all links back to this central theme of interpretation is the issue. Because if slavery was said in the Ten Commandments as being outright formidable, we wouldn't have had this issue for over 1,000 years or 2,000 years maybe. So it is down to this interpretation issue, which I find is so large. It's such a burden on both Islam and Christianity. You don't have to reply to all that. That was
that's
quite
what
I
know. I would just say, I mean, on that, I did recommend Paul Copan. You should have, Seth, have you read Paul Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster?
I've heard of him.
Yeah, I would recommend that book for, things about slavery and whatnot. And let me say, I'm not dismissing these things. There are things that I'm kind of I do consider myself a Christian, but there are things that I'm skeptical about. There are things that are problematic to me. But Paul Copan has a really good book that we could maybe discuss sometime. Actually, that would be a really good discussion. We could read it and, kind of go into it from there. But
also, I just want to say it's not surprising that there's atheists and Christians acting immorally in the world. I mean, that's what Christianity teaches. Christianity teaches original sin, So it's not surprising that there's either anyone of any beliefs, doing bad things, because that's what the Bible teaches.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my thing when I'm talking about God is dead and whatnot, and again, I recognize that I made some bold claims. Now, I'm going off of what Nietzsche says too. Nietzsche says, this hasn't reached the ears of men. This is going to take a while, right? When we really lose this story and these values. Well, what will happen after that? What will everything be predicated upon? I'm mainly concerned with what is the pulse of the human ethos? What gets us going? And for me, at the end of the day, it is something infinitely beyond ourselves. Kind of like Kierkegaard says, through the subjective passions, God. So it's really tough to see when, like Nietzsche says, we have killed God. We have wiped the horizon of all of its color. Well, what will come after that? What will everything be predicated upon? Will it be predicated on scientism? Maybe, but how far will that get you? My concern is this subjective experience towards that of the infinite being stripped away from humanity.
In a way, if there's no God, there's no hope.
Well, yeah, objectively speaking, there is no hope. I mean, there's nothing after,
I understand.
Maybe subjective hope, like, hey, I'm having a lot of fun in this life and whatnot. But I mean, I'm creating meaning in this life. But objectively speaking, there is no hope if there is no arbiter and no author of the story that we find ourselves in.
Definitely. Oh yeah, sorry for interrupting, James, but I just want to say something real quick. In a way, it's like I understand that Nietzsche was an optimistic thinker, that he created the Übermensch, and now we even though God is dead, we can still overcome. We can create our own values. We can still try to find meaning in life, like a subjective meaning. However, not even Nietzsche could have been the Übermensch. In a way, like Nietzsche's life was actually kind of sad when he had the mental breakdown he had later in his life. So I feel like ultimately not even this idea of the Übermensch can save humanity, even if God is dead. Like he tried to save humanity with the Übermensch, try to bring optimism back. But how ultimately though, I feel like it will fail.
Yeah, I mean that's my concern as well. That and I used to really affirm. I love Nietzsche. I mean he's one of my favorite philosophers. But I'm thinking about this, very deeply. And I read, I know I sent it to you, James, Christ and Nothing by David Bentley Hart. Right. Yeah. And he he talks about how, Nietzsche said 2,000 years and no new God. Well, David kind of argues that Christ has taken everything onto himself. All the answers, so to speak. Again, you would have to read it yourself. I'm just pulling this out of my head, but are found in this story, right? So when we strip humanity of the story, where will they find ultimate meaning? Will this cult of individualism just arise? And do you really get anything from that? I think that's the main concern, and this was Nietzsche's principal concern. How can we find meaning without God? That's where he posits the revaluation of all values. So
my question is, why do we need objective morality? Why do we need anything to be objective in the sense of hope, objective hope? I mean, I think the case can be very well made that the fact that everything is limited and so on. I think that does give a lot of value to life, and arguably more under the atheistic perspective, or one without the personal God. I think that there is a lot of value to be driven from the limited existence that we have under this assumption of no God. I think that there are advantages to that. For example, I don't believe objective morality is even as good as everybody says it is. I mean, it's essentially a moral prescription that we can't even argue against. There are arguments for and against the whole thing, whether if God said that child abuse was okay, would we all there are arguments against and for that, and fair enough to that. But I think that it's an important question to pose. Are we really okay with this sort of arbiter of a God telling us what is moral and what isn't, and one that is effectively totalitarian and and not even debatable. Because the good thing with subjective morality is that we can have a conversation about it. This is a democracy. It isn't a theocracy. You know, this isn't some kind of, to borrow sort of a Hitchens phrase, celestial North Korea. But you know, he uses that with rhetoric, and this is the thing. I don't think, you know, I've criticized the sort of rhetoric thing before, okay, but this isn't to say that it was all false, because I think that it is a good point to say that yes, there would be no democracy. Yes, that it would effectively be a theocracy state, a celestial state. So I think we really have to question if that is preferable, because as far as I'm concerned, I much prefer democracy and actually being able to disagree and to actually have some sort of opportunity to question things instead of just being told how to act and what is good or bad. I think that is a major hole in the theistic perspective.
But I mean, what if you're being told how to act in terms of that of the good?
Who's deciding what's good, though? I mean, God. I mean, you know, what if we disagree with that, though? Because God said, you know, that there are many things, and this is dubious as well. I mean, there are many things in the scripture that are more preferable than not. You know, for example, in the Bible, there are mandates on how to own a slave, and so, you know, was that necessary? And the thing is, under this view, we can't even question that.
Right,
we can't question that. That is not democracy. That is not a democratic vote. That is him saying, well, yes, by assumption, it is okay because I'm telling you how to own them. In fact, so I have a big issue with that.
No, I understand that. I mean, not to get into, I think we could have this for another discussion, but I think the Old Testament is like a redemptive. Oh no, it's fine, man. But a redemptive process. There is a difference. We tend to look at slavery in like the antebellum South, right? And I think there is a difference between indentured servitude and that type of slavery we find here in the South. But yeah, I mean, we could talk about that. That could be a whole nother discussion, and I think it would be a good discussion too. I forget if I had anything to add on to that. Seth, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, James brought a lot of interesting points.
Yeah.
I just want to say, if there's no objective standard, then there's no benchmark to judge, like, what is good, what is evil, what is better, what is worse, what is right, what is wrong, what is fair, what is unfair. I don't feel like there won't be any objective standard or benchmark for us to judge those things.
Sure.
So, in a way, it's like,
sorry to interrupt. That's where the vote would come in. That's where we would decide as a society. And also, I mean, I had a discussion with Randy as well. His YouTube channel is Faith More Millennial. Really interesting discussion. But we talked a bit about this, how we have to still remember that we, you know, even though our moral standards, principles may change over time, and even though we can look back in history where we thought what we were doing was moral, you know, slavery, for example, we may have, even an atheist may have said that. I'm sure they would have said that slavery, you know, everyone else is doing it, blah blah blah. You know, they get some sort of compensation, whatever argument they wanted to pull. So this isn't to say that the atheistic standards are, you know, I don't know, as good or worse. It's simply to say that there is at least the opportunity to talk about it and to debate it, and that's where I stand. And even if it means that we make mistakes along the way, I'm willing to take those mistakes, because at least it means that we're moving towards some kind of, you know, chosen agenda, instead of one that is just handed to us without being able to be questioned.
No, yeah, I see your point there too. I would say without even appealing to any kind of scripture, though. I mean, within us is this sort of moral intuition that is almost irrefutable. I mean, is it wrong to kill babies for fun? I mean, I don't need to appeal to any scriptural text for that. I just know, yes, it is wrong. You know what I mean? So, like, without even appealing to scripture, I think that we do have this built-in moral compass and intuition.
That's where ethics come in, though, isn't it? Because if we consider the trolley problem and so on, there are situations where killing a baby might actually be preferable to not. Let's say Hitler, as a child. Many people, if you ask them, they would say, yes, of course I would. Yes, it is a baby, but of course I would. And
Well,
that's the thing. Under certain preconditions, you can actually ethically, and this is not to say that I agree with this, but it is to say that there are arguments for and against it.
yeah.
You can ethically have a preference between, in which context you should do certain things, and I think that's a relevant point.
I think it vary. Yeah, I think it can vary. I did want to pull up this actually because I asked this question, this exact question. So I asked, would it be morally justified to have killed Hitler as a baby? And 13% said yes, it would have been, but 87% said no.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that to be very interesting.
Yeah.
It could be, yeah.
And also, I feel like that's kind of like a battle against normative ethics, like consequentialism or deontology.
Yeah.
So in a way, like a lot of people, when we talk about ethics, like a lot of people would agree on like moral realism and everything like that, but a lot of people would disagree on like how that would be in practice.
Yeah, you're right about that too. And atheists, like you said, James, can believe in objective morality. Russ Schaefer Landau, he's a moral realist. And the conversation really revolves around how do we ground these moral facts and duties? Where are they grounded in? That's what it really comes down to. Of course, you can be an atheist and believe in objective morality. There are many who do that. They would ground it in a more naturalistic framework, and theists would ultimately ground it in God. But yeah, I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything onto that, but.
And I feel like Nietzsche kind of did touch on morality in a way. Like he said that if there's no God, then there's no moral facts. Like if we have a moral law, then that means there has to be a moral lawgiver. However, if there's no moral lawgiver, then there's no moral law.
Right.
So like it's hard to see how there could be like any obligation, like divine command theory, if we have like a moral lawgiver. And now I know this gets into the Euthyphro dilemma and everything like that, but ultimately I believe that God is holy. So God's character, which is unchanging and holy, is the basis for morals, And so now we have a standard of a moral lawgiver telling us what we ought to do or what we ought not to do. Mm-hmm. However, if we take that away, where's the oughts at? It can't be in nature, because in a way, nature just is. It's just ethically neutral. So, like, in a way, like, where does that moral obligation come from?
That's
and going
true.
back to intuition, you said, Eric, like,
yeah,
the intuition of moral obligation is just so strong. It's just hard to deny it.
Yeah, and you're right about that, Seth. These things are descriptive. There's nothing in. Say if you see a murder take place, right, and you can describe the way the knife entered the victim, the blood and whatnot. Well, nothing in that description says it's morally wrong. Like you can't see above the scene of the crime. This is wrong in bubble letters. You know what I mean? So it's hard to say. Causing pain is really wrong. Like, why would that be wrong? You know what I mean?
Pain is sometimes good. That's the thing. I mean, we have
exactly.
We have
taking your child to the dentist is that one example, right? It's going to cause you pain, but you're going to get something out of this. So you're right, James. Pain is not always wrong.
Which is actually sort of a good argument against sort of the atheist. Well, I mean the suffering sort of what is it, theodicy? That sort of subject, because a lot of people say, oh well, why would God do bad things to us? And the reply, I mean, it's not it's not like I believe this necessarily, but I think that it's a bad argument to say that why would hypothetically God induce pain to anyone? Because pain is necessary in many, many ways.
Right.
And it's an infantile sort of argument, and it's very surface level. But so many atheists use it. I mean, new atheists, for example.
Yeah. I mean,
but at the same time, when Stephen Fry famously said, "Well, why did God create an insect to burrow into the eye socket of a child? Why create such even a phenomenon? Why even make it that painful? Why even born the child in the first place if they're just destined to die? I mean, obviously that there are arguments for and against that, but I feel that the main point there that he was making, which is some modes of suffering are just plainly unnecessary. If you really think about it, I do believe that.
I do too. I mean, I do too in a certain respect. I think there is gratuitous suffering, but going back to like soul building, we can touch upon this, the gratuitous suffering too. But going back to soul building, I think that I don't think if God exists, God commits logical contradictions, right? So God cannot make a circle a square. You know what I mean? Or like a triangle, a circle, 2 + 2 = 10. But what's really not talked about, I also don't think if God exists that he would commit ontological contradictions. So God cannot make it the case where I'm safely courageous, or I'm forcibly loving, or I'm respectfully disrespectful. You know what I mean? Those are just some things that come to mind. So, you know, following from that, I think that God can create a world where there is suffering, in where we become virtuous characters and we grow through that suffering and become mature adults and whatnot. But James, you're totally right. On the contrary of that, there does seem to be a lot of gratuitous suffering that is just wicked. Like, why in the hell is this happening? You know, maybe cancer to a 5-year-old child. Like, what would the soul building from that be? So natural evil is an argument that is extremely, I don't even want to say refuted, because I don't really think it can be refuted. It's the toughest objection to theism. Yeah. There's zero doubt about it.
Yeah, and I just want to say something real quick. Suffering on the Christian worldview has meaning. You know, don't get me wrong, it's very hard to see evil in the world and suffering. However, ultimately, there's still hope. There's meaning in the suffering. However, I feel like the problem of evil is also hard for atheists as well. Like, I mean, is suffering irrelevant on a world where God does not exist or there's no hope? You know, I feel like ultimately suffering has no meaning, you know, if God doesn't exist.
This is just a brute fact of, you know, I mean, again, I may not like that, but that is irrelevant to the truth of the situation. And I also want to comment on the sort of thing that, you know, under the Christian worldview, suffering is justified. I find that very difficult to get on the side of that, because we have to think about how many children, how many people have been tortured and who have screamed and prayed that the suffering would have ended, and it never did after 30 years. And so the claim is really there that you're saying, or you know, the argument, I guess, is just that it was all meant something, or all meant, you know. I mean, I find that very, very, I don't know, it rubs me the wrong way. You know?
Oh no, you're good, man. I wouldn't say that it's justified. Rather, there's meaning. It's not purposeless. So, like, for example, Cain and Abel. Like, Cain killed Abel. However, I'm not saying what Cain did was right. What Cain did was wrong. However, there's still hope for Abel in the afterlife.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was saying all of that under that exact assumption. I didn't mean that you were directly saying that it was justified. But my point still remains, insofar as I think it is denigrating the person's subjective emotional experience of their life being taken away, tortured over. You know, there are cases of somebody being tortured for over 30 years, praying to God, nothing happened, and to say that will all be, you know, in some way stringed together, all sorted out, all reconciled. To me, that is, I don't know. I mean, it seems I just get very uncomfortable with that kind of view.
Oh yeah, I agree with you, James. In a way, like, there's an intellectual side of the problem of evil, but there's also an emotional side of the problem of evil. And a great passage is in The Brothers of Karamazov with Alyosha and Ivan.
It's great.
In a way, like, there's theodicies for the problem of evil, how, like, evil is a privation of good, or what we've been talking about, soul making. But sometimes we need to show empathy. Sometimes we need to comfort those who struggle with the problem of evil. When Ivan is talking to his brother Alyosha, he's saying like, why would God allow this, you know, and everything like that. And he does respond to theodicies, like the soul making theodicy we've been talking about. However, Alyosha just comforts him, doesn't say anything, doesn't give a theodicy, doesn't talk about the intellectual side. Alyosha just comforts him. And sometimes we have to do that, you know. And I feel like Dostoevsky showed the emotional side of the problem of evil. Sometimes in the universities or on YouTube, we talk about the intellectual side, but we forget the emotional side.
That's a good point, Seth. Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And James, what I would say to you, I think you are primarily concerned with why would God do this in the first place, right? If there's going to be this suffering, like why even do it in the first place? Why not just, you know, Aristotle believed that, you know, God existed, but he didn't really care about human beings. I mean, he was just kind of there, didn't really take part in human beings. So maybe am I nailing your view down correctly? Like, why did God even do this in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, just think of the, you know, the Gospel of Job. I mean, just a lot of people say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, it was all solved in the end. But really, we have to remember that why should Job even be grateful for all of his things being torn to pieces? You know, his children all killed. How is that in any way supplementary to the idea that God is benevolent? Because in the end, it's the same thing. It's supposed to be all reconciled, all forgiven. But why did it even need to happen in the first place? What, for some kind of vague lesson? I mean, seriously, to me that seems very, even for a metaphor, that seems rather grotesque to me.
Well, I do share similar concerns with you, James, because, you know, in the book of Job, it is kind of like God says, well, you know, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And kind of just like, you know, it is what it is, Job. I mean, this is how it is. And Job's kind of left like, you know, okay, is there really an answer to that? But what I would ultimately say, that at the end of the day, this is a problem. This is a major problem. I do agree. But on a Christian worldview, like you were alluding to earlier, Seth, there is an answer for this. Now, this reconciliation of, you know, if this is true, where you live on for eternity, there's just infinite joy, you know, you live on. This could reconcile for finite suffering. But the question still remains, why finite suffering at all? Right? Like why, you know, and that's a good question, man. That's a tough one to tackle.
And I also just want to say that God has a morally sufficient reason for why he allows suffering. What is that reason? I don't know. I don't know. But the one thing about the book of Job, or another example would be Elijah, God always listens to us. Now, I can understand, like, the God of Christianity isn't harsh. It's not like he doesn't care for us and like he's just standing back and letting this all happen. Rather, he listens to us. And he says, I do have a reason. And it's up to us whether to trust in him or to not trust in him. And ultimately, it's our choice to make that decision.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And at the end of the day, though, a lot of us, we want answers to everything, right? That's what we yearn for and search for. And I do think when it comes down to this question specifically of natural evil, or why even create a world at all where evil exists, I do think there are theodicies, but at the end of the day, this is somewhat inscrutable. It is impossible to really maybe understand this from, again, I think that obviously we're limited. We're not omniscient. There could be a plethora of reasons that we cannot see why God allows this to be the case. I don't know. I mean, and I don't know is not necessarily forfeiting. It's not forfeiting. It's being honest. I feel that that's an honest answer.
I think, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I'm really half and half on this, because I feel that philosophically speaking, under the theism, under all of these sort of arguments, I think that there is some merit to saying that, look, God is by definition transcendent. God is by definition knowing the cause and the reason behind all. So, you know, intuitively, look, I do feel that there is some merit into saying, look, I don't know, because I feel that there are some things about God that we just can't know, by definition anyway. But on the other hand,
Right.
on the other hand, I get very skeptical. I'm getting all Matt Dillahunty because I think,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that's a cop out,
Yeah,
and
possible.
I just have a sort of this cognitive dissonance over, look, yes, sure, under the philosophical theistic view, yeah, okay, you can kind of make that claim, but on the sort of skeptical side of things, it is a bit of conjecture as well. It's assuming quite a lot. Yeah, that's my take on it.
But I would say this, just because we don't know the answer of something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a cop-out. By affirming, we're trying to give theodicies for why this might happen, but at the very edge, we just say, well, I can give you reasons, but I'm just not sure. I mean, I'm not in the mind of God if God exists. But I understand it does feel like a cop-out to say, I don't know. It does feel like a cop-out.
Unsatisfying
now, if
is
you have
maybe a good word.
I'm sorry?
Unsatisfying is maybe a good word.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with that too. Now, I have a question for two of you, for the both of you. You guys have heard of Justin Mooney, right? Have you heard of him? He's a contemporary philosopher. He's still going through his PhD program and whatnot. But he has this awesome example of the rainforest. I might have brought this up to you before, James, but say if I could give you a button right now and you would press it and you would destroy the rainforest. So in the rainforest, there are animals, there's waterfalls, there's trees, there's birds, there's beauty all over the rainforest, this Amazon rainforest. Now, there's suffering in this rainforest too. There's all kinds of suffering. Would you press that button to completely annihilate the rainforest and obliterate it from anything coming for, anything else enjoying the rainforest? Would you press that button?
You want to take the first sacrifice, Seth?
No, I wouldn't push the button. No, I wouldn't. Even though there's animal suffering going on, I don't feel like it would be wrong for me to just to kill them all,
I agree with you, and the reason being, if we were to press this further, well, why wouldn't you press the button? Is because I believe the intrinsic nature of life itself outweighs that of the bad and suffering. James, what would you say to that? Would you press that button? Maybe if you're an antinatalist.
The thing is, I feel like we press the button all day long if we're meat eaters. For those who are not vegans, for those who are not vegans, I feel that they press the button all day long because it's all fine and all fine and dandy to say that, yeah, of course you won't press the button because animals, that they have intrinsic meaning. Really? Do you act as if they do? Because most of the people claiming that don't act as if that is true because they still eat meat. And so in a way, we all press that button by creating the supply and demand of eating meat. So I think, coming from a vegan myself, it's the thing is, right, is that this might look, I guess my views aren't objective on this yet, part of the pun, but I think that both arguments can be made in the sense of, the thing is, look, the implication is the end result of veganism is to say that we won't necessarily have a necessity or space or whatever to keep animals. And the thing is, and this argument is brought up a lot, it's like, well, what happened to all the animals if you didn't eat meat? Okay, let's just assume that we wouldn't keep them arbitrarily, because we probably would. But let's just assume they all went out of existence. Now, I would probably say that it is more moral that they were not in existence instead of being in a reoccurring endless cycle of factory farming, being killed, being reproduced, used, exploited. Yeah. So that in that regard, I would say that I would say that maybe it's even more moral to just wipe them out entirely, if it means that the other side of that is what we even do to them, which is of course true. And so I think this is a huge issue, because many theists would say the same thing. They would say, of course not, but they don't realize that they're not embodying that claim because they still eat meat.
Well, no, that's totally true. But I would say, I understand that point. But I would say, aside from veganism, what the rainforest example or analogy or whatever is trying to get at is really, you could think of it as humans. I mean, would you annihilate the human race right now? If you could, with the press of a button. And I feel like I would not, because I do think that there is this intrinsic value of life and goodness and beauty and laughter and joy and fun that outweighs suffering. So I would not press that button. Guys, I have to use the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back in 10 seconds.
Yeah, no worries. see, that's the thing with beer, like, and that's kind of why I usually drink like whiskey and rum, because at least like you don't sort of have to go to the bathroom every, like, I mean, beer is famous for this anyway, but yeah, I mean, maybe I'll wait until Eric is back, but
definitely, man. It's been good talk so far, man. Whew, it's been good. Whew.
Yeah. I was going to ask, what drink do you drink alcohol at all, or?
I don't drink alcohol. Nah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah. I think, what I do think it's sad that people need to drink alcohol to even have conversations with other people. I feel because we're having conversations like this and there's no alcohol involved, apart from Eric's side, but I trust that he obviously doesn't need alcohol to have a conversation. It's more of a appetizer, really, for me as well. But yeah, like you were saying, it's cool to have these conversations. And here we go, Eric. Yeah, no.
Sorry about that. I just
no worries.
Yeah.
We were talking all things about you behind your back.
Oh God, guys, man, I swear
that you'll hear.
I thought we were friends.
No, I would like to not to make this explanation too long, but I would like to say that there is another side to my response, which is the red, and I will tie this with the button thing, which is because I'm half in agreement that there is something special about existence, about human beings, but on the other side, I do take a lot. I do think that the antinatalist argument is maybe irrefutable in strict terms of ethics. In strict terms of ethics, I would say that it's irrefutable. Whether I would embody that or whether I think that it is the best approach to life, that is a different question.
It's a strong argument.
But I think that on the ethical, so if we're being strictly philosophical, I would. But on a personal level, I find that very difficult. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, no, definitely. So let's see.
Oh yeah. Sorry for interrupting, Eric. And also, I just want to say, the reason why I said no is usually my ethic is based on the rawness or rightness of actions rather than their consequence. So if you're thinking about consequentialism, people would probably push the button because it would end suffering. However, I feel like that action would just be so wrong for me to do. I just can't do it. Even though it will end suffering, that action is just wrong. In a way, it just goes back to consequentialism and deontology. In a way, it's I'm looking at it like a deontological view. That action is just so wrong. Yes, it will end the suffering, but I just can't see myself doing it because the action is just wrong.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I mean, James, even your point, you do say that there is something special about existence.
Yeah,
possibly. Yeah. And I mean, I think this cosmic participation that we find ourselves in is, I mean, just amazing. It's just miraculous. And there is suffering, but should it all come to an end? Maybe practically speaking, no, but James, philosophically, I think you do have a point. But that would be another great discussion. Anti-fatalism. We could talk about that for a while. That is a really, really interesting.
David Bennett's book, Better to Have Never Been, I would recommend it to everyone. I think that the book itself is a bit dry and not necessarily the most entertaining read, but in terms of the most sort of comprehensive antinatalist book, I would say that's worth checking out. Or just watch his YouTube videos. I would just check him out. Anyone who hasn't already.
Awesome. Yeah. Guys, I don't know if you want to have any final thoughts, but probably gonna run pretty soon.
Yeah, no worries, man.
So I think it was a great discussion, and I hope we can definitely do it again.